A few years ago, I asked my community a very simple question. I'm working on creating a video on the power of silence. Some things never change. And I need real life examples of freakouts by exes during a no contact rule. 89 people responded with wild stories, like an ex admitting to starting fights to get our client just to talk to them, or sending a GIF in a text to say, "I will not be ignored," or by starting out sending rude, hateful messages and then doing a complete turnaround 27 days later. But nothing, and I mean nothing, stood out like this comment right here, where this woman said her ex called her 72 times in 5 days over Facebook Messenger, and then literally goes on to give a day-by-day breakdown of how it all played out. So what's going on here? Is this normal? Well, I think the average person would be inclined to believe that these examples are simply a symptom of the silence that was administered by the clients who are using the no contact rule. Think of it like a positive consequence to it. And everyone knows that silence makes your ex desperate, right? Right? Well, yes and no. It's kind of complicated. Let's start first with this idea embedded in the breakup landscape that silence is guaranteed to make your ex miss you. The internet is literally littered with stories of people using silence, a la a no contact rule, on their ex and that ex missing them. But just as I discussed in one of my latest videos, the insane psychology of exes during no contact, there's a difference between an ex missing you and actually contacting you. Check this out. This is a poll I conducted in our community where I asked individuals who completed the no contact rule how often their ex actually reached out to them during it. 64% of participants said that they never heard from their ex at all. And yet every single success story interview that I have done swears by the power of the no contact rule.
The no contact period, which I'm
no contact rule,
no contact period.
How does this make any sense? Well, believe it or not, I think the answer to reconciling this paradox lies here, in this book right here. Now, the brilliance of a book like Attached is it really helps us understand what's going on in an ex's head when you're using silence on them in that post-breakup period. Amir Levine and Rachel S.F. Heller, who wrote this book, make a really interesting statement on page 114. They argue that although you may be an avoidant, your attachment machinery is still in place, making you just as vulnerable to separation. It's only when your mental energy is needed elsewhere and you are caught off guard that your emotions and feelings actually emerge. And this is where it gets really fun. You see, while the average ex that we study tends to have dismissive, avoidant characteristics, the average client that we have tends to have anxious characteristics. This means that what the avoidant person wants is space. They want to maintain their independence. Meanwhile, the anxious client wants reassurance. They want to fix things after the breakup. And as a result, this really interesting dynamic unfolds. The avoidant person pushes the anxious person away naturally, and the anxious person attempts to pull the avoidant back towards them, which just further causes the avoidant individual to dig their heels into the sand and keep their guard up. It's only after the anxious person gives the avoidant person space, a la a no contact rule, that the avoidant can begin to direct more of their energies into other projects or people or things. Their walls essentially become easier to scale, and it's easier to catch them off guard when you actually end up reaching out to them, which, according to Attached, means that the avoidant's true feelings and emotions can finally emerge. And now we come back to our success stories. On average, the success stories that I've had the pleasure of interviewing for my podcast have gotten their exes back usually around month 5 or 7, so basically half a year. And that's only after they began working with me, which means that they could have been attempting to get their ex back for 3 months and failing before they even attempted something like a no contact rule. All in all, it could take as much as 10 months before the average success story actually sees results. That's a long time, but if you understand the psychology of how exes work in the post-breakup period, it tracks. The part that I don't really see anyone talking about with avoidant exes, the average ex that we study, is this idea of separation elation. I don't know if people are afraid of adding further heartbreak to an already difficult situation. But the reality is that in my experience, most exes, when you break up with them or when they break up with you who are avoidant, are overjoyed at the situation. They've finally gotten their independence back. Check this out. This is my famous avoidant death wheel, which essentially tracks an avoidant's entire experience from the beginning of a relationship to the end and then back to the beginning again. It's ultimately a cyclical cycle that's comprised of 8 distinct stages. Stage 1, they want someone to love them. Stage 2, they find someone, they believe their problems are over. Stage 3, they start noticing some worrying things. Stage 4, they think they need to leave the relationship. Stage 5, they actually leave the relationship. Stage 6, they're overjoyed and happy that they left the relationship. Stage 7, they start to feel kind of lonely. And then finally, stage 8, they start feeling depressed and wonder why can't they ever find the right person, which leads them right back to stage 1, and again, the cycle continues. Stage 6 is something I want to keep your attention on. This is also considered the separation elation stage, the stage where an ex is overjoyed and happy that they got their independence back. In the past, I've even referred to this as the second honeymoon period. And here's the scariest part. I can actually tell how successful someone is going to be at getting their ex back based on how they react to this specific stage in the avoidant death wheel. Because you see, in my mind, this is the make or break stage for most people. Because how you react to your ex putting their walls up will actually cause the ex to put more walls up or to have them small enough for you to be able to climb over them. Remember, according to Attached, it's only when an avoidant's mental energy is needed elsewhere that they are caught off guard and allow their emotions and feelings to emerge. But it's always funny to me. I feel like I've taught this exact lesson before. Do no contact. Give an avoidant space. Blah, 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 blah. And the clients that I've worked with mostly agree with me. They understand the psychology behind why it's a good idea. And yet, they still don't do it. Because there's no worse feeling than seeing someone you love so much discard you and enjoy the fact that they discarded you. Your anxiety tends to take over. You go into a fix-it mode. I can fix this. I can fix that. What did I do wrong? The problem is that you go into the fix-it mode at the exact wrong time. You tell yourself that even though you understand the basics, your situation is the exception. The problem, yet 9 times out of 10, it's not. But we're really only talking about one part of the equation here. I'm not fool enough to subscribe to this idea that all you need to do is be silent and your ex will magically come back to you. No, in my opinion, you need to be active in your silence. Check out this beauty of a quote from one of my favorite resources, freetoattach.com. Avoidants are free to long for an ex once that person is unavailable out of a relationship and typically out of contact so that they are untouched by actual engagement and their deactivation systems aren't triggered. So what you really need to do, rather than being silent for X amount of days and then starting back up again, you need to throw yourself headlong into this idea of actually trying to get over your ex. That's the thing about silence that no one is telling you. That's why maybe you've tried the no contact rule or tried to be silent in the past and it really hasn't worked out for you. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but don't just take it from me.
If we stay stagnant who we are and we don't evolve and we don't see ourselves reaching new goals and new heights in our life, there's no intrinsic motivation. So challenge yourself to make yourself uncomfortable and actually follow through with the program and do things for you.
And if you think about it logically, there are 3 core components that people will typically point to that prove that silence is this ultimate strategy. You have fear of loss and scarcity, which suggests that people value what is rare or what they feel losing. So when communication ceases, your ex might begin to perceive the relationship or the individual as more valuable, igniting this fear of loss. But the thing about fear of loss is they actually need to fear losing you. If they just see you sitting on your hands waiting for your silence timer to go off, then nothing has really changed. They're still going to view you as the same person. Then, of course, you have the contrast effect. Now, if a relationship involved frequent and intense communication, then the sudden shift to silence can create this stark contrast, this abrupt change that can make the absence of communication feel more pronounced, which ultimately leads them to feeling desperate. Honestly, this comes back to the separation elation thing I was talking about before. You remember how I said I can tell how successful someone is based on how they handle the separation elation phase in the avoidant death wheel? Well, this plays directly into the contrast effect. What you don't want to do is lose discipline and blow your ex's phone up. Not only does it cause them to put more walls up, but it doesn't give them any kind of contrast to compare. Once again, for them, it's just more of the same. You were incredibly anxious on the outset of the breakup, and you're incredibly anxious after the breakup. Then, of course, you have reflection and idealization. People who point to this one will say that silence provides an opportunity for reflection. Sometimes this leads to idealizing the past relationship and focusing more on positive memories, which can increase the desire to reconnect. This is really the ball game, in my opinion. We know from that quote that I cited from Free to Attach that an avoidant will only allow themselves to miss you once they feel that you are unavailable out of a relationship. That's when they allow themselves to start reminiscing about phantom exes. But it all boils down to one simple fact. Are you attempting to move on during the silence? For me, this is the single most difficult thing to get across to new clients. They're expecting me, when they sign up for a coaching session, to give them some sort of brilliant tactic or strategy, some sexy new phrase to text the ex that unlocks things. Instead, all they get from me is a speech on the importance of appearing to move on, specifically during silence, going on dates with new people, starting a new hobby, finding something they care about just as much as their ex, and pouring all of their anxiety into a healthy outlet. That's what works. That's what makes exes desperate.